has to recognize that the military has a responsibility for the overall national security of the country. And one of the tools they can use is to get into the public space and do that. Over the years, we recognize the role of digital media taking a part of that public space. And that part of that public space is that digital media, which they want to deal with it. However, there's a larger conversation that needs to be had or resolved. One is the fact that whereas the military can do that on their own, in its democracy, there are appropriate authorities who can do that. And best practice would suggest to us that there's always a need to identify about three things. One, they need to balance the issue of national security, which will always take preeminence, but must be balanced with the need for privacy and the right for freedom of expression, freedom of interaction, freedom of opinion. That's one. The second thing is also to understand that for you to do that in a democracy, to carry everybody along, is to recognize that there need to be laws to be put in place. Like in most times you have what you call a cyber security kind of law, which goes through the National Assembly and is approved and will be subject to renewal every now and then with modifications, depending on the complexity and as much as technology improves. Because you do not want to improve technology for people to relate and hamper the ability of those who are in charge of our security to be able to monitor and understand what is going on. The third aspect of it is that if we say that the unity of this country is non-negotiable, if you say that the issue concerning our democracy is about our interactions, you want to encourage the freedom of different shades of opinion. What government needs to do, therefore, is to bring and advance new arguments to enhance the whole public debate, not to stifle one person or get into the muddy waters, which perhaps may be legally challenged in terms of what is hate speech, what is aggressive speech or not. So to answer you directly, the military has a responsibility in view of the heightened security situation in the country to take responsible actions, including cyber security, cyber monitoring, but it must be done in such a way not to intimidate the citizenry, but we must recognize they have a right to do so. But it is not for them to be announcing such. It is for perhaps the civil authorities in terms of intelligence, monitoring, the national security agencies, the national intelligence agencies, to make such an announcement that they do such. And these are lawful intercepts, interventions that go on. Otherwise, you run the risk of running an environment whereby anybody can determine that you have made statements which are anti-government. Now, anti-government is also good in a democracy. Let me clarify that. It is that you have views which are different. It can be expressed in an intelligent manner and whatever. And as such, recognizing that the digital space is a core component of the public space now. We don't want to go back to those days where we have draconian decrees that says you cannot say this, you cannot write this, you cannot express this. Now, it's a fine line for which a regulation that defines the right of intelligence agencies to do intercepts, to do monitoring, in order to keep us all safe, which will be passed and be reviewed, depending on the time, maybe 2 years, every 4 years or 6 years, and that will be okay. So fundamentally, I think the principle about monitoring is consistent with what a decent, responsible government should do. The fact that it's a military going to monitor my conversation is something I would worry about. Well, I don't think both sides are really wrong, but whereas the cyber law takes care about issues around your right to malign me, your right to say things which are not wrong, and creates a context to define digital communication, digital interaction, digital responsibilities. The issue of intelligence was never really that focus of that particular cybersecurity. What we are talking about right now is the right of the state to monitor you as against those privacy rules that you have, privacy rights you have. And in most cases, we believe that national security sometimes trumps privacy security. But that's a larger debate that's going on across the world. But I think in Nigeria, we can relate with the fact that given what is happening in Boko Haram, in different sectors of the economy, it is right for the military to also have a cyber unit that provides them intelligence to prevent crimes, threats to the country to take place. It also provides them the ability to monitor certain persons of interest, and it also must give them the ability for them to move against those people, to disrupt and to disengage those activities coming in. Where I think the thin line comes in is where we get it modeled up, where people talk about hate speech or whatever. The definition of hate speech is not like I say things that's against the president. It has to be, it's defined in law. I do not know the exact description, but I think it will cover things like ethnicity, religion, sexual preferences or whatever. That's where you get into the hate issue. And if you see what's going on in the United States, you see what's going on in the United Kingdom, you see what's going on in Western democracies as well, even in India, you then understand that it's a continuing conversation. What Nigeria needs to do is not to repeat the mistakes of those other crimes, to understand that we have serious security concerns, and the private sector, the civil society organizations are really willing, in the main, to understand why we need to do this, but we're not under a military regime. So whatever the military is doing, let it do it within itself. It cannot enforce any of those things in a civil democracy. It must do so within an aspect of a law which will also be administered by a civil administration. I think the point you're saying is that there's uncertainty in the knowledge of the law, in the interpretation, and it's in the execution. That's all we know. There's lack of clarity. In the absence of clarity, we cannot have an intelligent conversation. So what we perhaps do is to provide a better context to how to understand this thing. You know, the military has a right, especially in the fact that you actually have countries go to war and they actually fight cyber war. So the real question you should be talking to the military is, don't worry too much about anti-government rhetorics. What you should focus on in real cyber war, things about fighting people with viruses, with infecting people, whatever, like what we learned about Russia, its intervention, unproven as it were, both in Europe and in America. And those are the kind of things you want to learn from a sovereign military perspective. You can also have domestic type of warfare, whereby people infect people's minds, and you call those ones, the technical term is like you are poisoning people's minds, you are inflicting, you are inciting. Oh, those ones are real issues, which a responsible sovereign nation should also consider. So I think the argument must not be made from the coloration of why out there they. No, they should. A responsible sovereign government must put its military to understand that traditional warfare is no longer the same way as we talk about business and say it's all about digital communications. We can do here, we can broadcast live, we can do this. It's the same thing as you can do in the military. So they must